thank you very much for pushing me forward, because I hadn't been publishing anything in the past, because I was a little bit in a, how do you call it, in a, not a writer's block, but podcasting's block.
Okay. What do you mean that I pushed you? What did I do?
Nothing. You gave me the motivation to make an interview, because actually right now you are like my teacher, because I listen to your podcast in Italian, because I am an Italian learner. And for me, it's really a perfect podcast. It's very short and it comes every day and you have many topics. But yeah, you can tell it afterwards what it is all about.
It's great. So you know everything about my private life, because I basically talk about my private life.
Yes. For example, I know your cat, so it's called Sputnik. It's funny.
Naughty Sputnik. Broke my bilancia.
Yeah. And of course, if you don't feel comfortable with a question, we can just skip it.
Never happened to me that someone asked me a question that I wasn't comfortable with.
Okay, that is perfect.
You really have to, give lots of effort to make me uncomfortable.
That is pretty cool. Well, I will begin maybe with a little introduction of myself. So I am Daniel, and I come from Switzerland, from the German-speaking part of Switzerland. My goal with my Fluent podcast is or was to become fluent in English. So I started in 2016. There was a point in which I started interviewing other people, and nowadays I feel comfortable. So I reached my goal in English. The next step will be to do the same thing in Italian. So we will see. Could you introduce yourself a little bit, and maybe also with a focus on language learning?
Yes, my name is Cristina Marras, and I studied learning language at uni, or actually at school, and then I studied at uni because I was born in Sardinia in Italy. Sardinia is a semi-remote island in Italy. It's very difficult to get in and out because of the transportation situation. And I always saw learning languages as a way to escape. In fact, after finishing high school, I didn't really know what to do, which uni to choose. And I decided, okay, I learn language, English and German. And then after I have learned the language, I can travel and decide later on what I want to do when I grow up. And I left Italy quite young. I was 19 and I moved to Germany because German was my first language that I was studying. And I fell in love with Berlin and I lived there for 8 years. Then after the wall came down, I didn't like the place anymore and I didn't know where to go. I met a German-Australian photographer, fell in love, moved to Australia, and I stayed there for 23 years with, different partners in between. Got married, had a child, and got my profession. I worked as a journalist, radio journalist, and always using the language, always using language skills, and not so much Italian. Also, I also worked as a translator. So I've always been working with languages. For me, everything is filtered through the lens of languages, and I love languages.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool. And so when it comes to your identity, do you see yourself as a Sardinian person or an Italian person, or how do you see yourself?
That's a very difficult question, Daniel, because I see myself as an expat. As long as I was living in outside Italy, I felt kind of Italian, and I will go into the Sardinian part later on. But I had, a kind of Italian identity, and I was very proud of my accent, my Italian accent, because lots of people, when they move abroad, they try to get rid of their accent, almost to hide, but I was always flaunting it. In fact, sometimes it happened that people told me, "Oh, Christina, I love your accent," and I shocked them. What do you mean? I don't have any accent. And because in Australia, people are very politically correct. They freaked out. Oh, sorry. And then I said, oh, look, I'm joking. I know that I have an accent. I'm glad that you like it, but, let's try to talk about something else. Yes, I always feel like an expat because I lived almost over half of my life abroad. I always came back to Italy to visit my family, but I was constantly somewhere else. I moved back to Italy for good 7 years ago, but I still feel an expat because I am different from the other people who live here in Italy. I have other interests. Almost all my friends are somewhere else. And then there is the issue of the Sardinian identity. I grew up in a Sardinian-speaking family. My father and my mother's first language is Sardinian, but they only spoke Italian with me and with my brother because back then in the 70s, it was considered shameful to speak in Sardinian because Sardinian was the language of the poor people, of the peasant people. And so I'm fluent in Italian, German, and English, understand a bit of Spanish. And for my entire life, I was unable to communicate with my grandmother from my mother's side. She was illiterate. She didn't speak any Italian. She only spoke Sardinian. She lived in a village. And I could never talk to her. And when I was living abroad, I really loved her. And so I would call her over the phone when she finally got the phone in the home. And, there were these surreal situations that I was calling from Germany and say, hi, Nonna, how are you? And she would say, I'm fine. And so far I understood. But then I didn't understand what she said. I couldn't speak Sardinian. So there were these long silences and giggling and so at a certain stage of my life, I was very, very, very angry with my mother. I said, why didn't you teach me Sardinian? Now I understand that she didn't know any better, and she really thought that she was doing something good for us, that she was giving us tools to go ahead, Italian, because back then people didn't believe that kids could be perfectly bilingual. That wasn't either or, but I could have learned both languages, but so I would like to feel more Sardinian, but I'm working on that.
Yeah, actually, I pretty loved that episode about your grandma when I listened to that episode, and it struck a chord with me, and maybe also because I can feel you in a way. I have a grandmother from Argentina. Well, I can speak the language, but I am not proficient. So there is the possibility to communicate, but nevertheless, sometimes I felt that there is a barrier between us because we didn't speak at the same level. And it's amazing how you produce your podcast. And actually, I think you began with Tre Minuti Grezzi 2 years ago, and you told in the episode that it was supposed to be an experiment, right? Because you began the introduction by saying it's an experiment, but now I think you are 500 episodes in, or almost 500.
497, I think, was today.
So can you maybe tell us a little bit about your podcast? What is it about?
Absolutely. So I have to start saying that usually when I do podcasts, I am really, really precise. I write a script and then I work a lot on soundscape, on everything. So it takes me hours to do 1 minute of, the podcast, really. So, and this is the way I work because I work as a podcaster. And this is okay, but it's a bit difficult sometimes because I would like to do something quick. And also, when I started doing the Tre Minuti Grezzi, I didn't have anything in Italian. I do almost entirely my podcast production in English because there is a bigger market of people who can understand English. But I really wanted to do something in Italian. I didn't know what to do. And I thought, okay, let's experiment. Let's use this thing in Italian as a way also to push my boundaries because I know what I'm good at, and I'm good at script and soundscape, all this stuff, but I'm not so good at improvising in front of the mic because I want everything to be very, very, very precise. So I started with the 3 Minuti Grezzi, like an experiment, like throwing myself from a plane without a parachute. And that's exactly my attitude. When it's a daily podcast, and already this is really taunting because although it's only 3 minutes long and I don't do any preparation, nothing written, nothing at all. I just, and you can tell because unlike my usual podcast, there are lots of, there is no music, there is no production whatsoever. But because I have many friends abroad, I also want to translate into English, and I want not just to translate it, but also to subtitle it. So I produce these 3 minutes in Italian that with a transcript in Italian for usability, and in English with the translation in English. And then this gets transformed into a video with subtitles so that people can listen to in Italian and read as it goes along in English. And it takes me, when I started doing the 3 Minuti Grezzi, it took me about 2 hours every episode. And now I have really my system to the second, to the millisecond. It takes me less than 1 hour for one episode. So I get up in the morning, I go through my emails, I get ideas, and then, as I said, I don't write anything in front of the mic, and I talk about whatever I can. There are a couple of rules that I've set to myself. I don't talk about topical things, so I want them to be okay to be listened to forever. Like they are not time linked to any big episode that happens, or I'm not talking about news. Yeah. I talk more about generic topics, and can be anything that really touched me in a way. I remember I did an episode about I was going through a street and there was this woman. She was obviously a foreigner woman, a worker that works, one from Ukraine that works with all elderly people in Italy, a carer, and she was having a lunch on a bench, and as I was walking by, I saw that she took this bottle, and she realized in that moment that she didn't have a bottle opener. And I stood there looking at her, and because I know how to open a bottle of beer with a lighter, I learned, when I was young, and I drank lots of beer, and I used to smoke as well. My husband back used to smoke, and he was with me. So, give me your lighter. What do you need it for? Don't worry. I got the lighter, and I asked her, "Do you want me to help you?" She didn't speak Italian, but I made the sign. There was obvious that I wanted to help her open this bottle of soft drink. And so I opened her the bottle and I gave it to her, and she was so happy, and I felt so happy because she was having a lunch and she was drinking something. And the day after, I did my 3 Minuti Grezzi, just saying, "Oh, you know what happened to me? I was walking by and this woman, blah blah blah," and it's also a way for me to keep a diary. And in fact, sometimes I listen back to my episodes and say, "Oh, I completely forgot that I talked about that." So it's also a good memory for me to keep a diary of things that happen. And in the description of the podcast, I talk about big stuff, but in a very easygoing way. And then I talk about very, tiny things, banality, but in a more serious way. And that's a bit my attitude.
And how many takes does it take to make one episode? Do you make just one try and then you just go with it?
There's no try. Or? What you heard is what it is. I don't do any editing. The only editing that I do is cut at 3 minutes exact. And usually this is where towards the end in the episode, sometimes you can say, because, I've got 5 seconds to go. I have to say something, but 5 seconds are not long enough to say something new. So that's the only juggling that I do, but never, ever, 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 ever any editing. What you listen to is my first and only take. And, that's my challenge to be entertaining, and also to use the time wisely, because 3 minutes is okay, but it's also a long time because you have to talk about something that makes sense with a start, a middle, and an end. And as I said, if you have finished to say whatever you wanted to say and you still have 20 seconds, that's big. But I've always been very good at talking. I used to work in radio when I lived in Melbourne. I worked for over 10 years as a radio journalist. I had my daily program. So I'm good at chatting and, talking about anything.
Do you think this is a skill that anyone can pick up or that anyone can practice to do, maybe? Did you become even better after almost 500 episodes?
I've always loved talking to people. In fact, in one of my email address is talktome@ so and so. I always loved talking to people, talking to strangers. I approach people and I just chat away. I was born like that. And I think that if you are a very shy person, there are some exercises that you can do and you can get better. But really, you have to have an inner need to do so.
Yeah.
Mind you, when I do Vox Pop, when I go and do interviews and stop people in the street, sometimes I do Vox Pop. It's there is always this moment that whom do I stop? How do I approach? But basically, I love talking to people. I'm the person that when I'm at the waiting room at the doctor, how are you? Or when I meet the people in the elevator, I'm always how are you? How was your day? Oh, I like your blouse. You're going to the shopping. So I'm always chatting, very chatty person.
This might have helped you also in your language learning journey, right? It helped you to become fluent in many languages.
Yeah, funny enough, but I studied the languages and I approached the language learning very with a method. In fact, when I was studying German, I was really a good student because, as you speak German, you know that German, unlike English, is a language with lots of rules, but everything has got a rule. So if you learn all the rules, you can speak perfectly. In fact, when I was living in Berlin, my German was really excellent. I had a strong accent, of course, but I have a very, very good grasp of the language. In English, I lived 23 years in Melbourne and I still, my son, his first language is English. And sometimes I say, Mama, you don't say that in English. It's not wrong, but you don't say that. Because in English, doesn't matter how long you've been learning it, but there is always this Fingerspitzengefühl, this thing, this sensibility of the native speaker that I cannot tell you why it's wrong, but we wouldn't say that if you were a native speaker. So, I was always learning. In fact, recently during the COVID lockdown, when I was very bored, I tried to start learning Japanese because I love the Japanese culture. I sometimes I still taking on and off with the apps, but I don't have the motivation because I don't live there. And always when I was learning a language, I moved in the country to learn it. But as an adult, it's very, very difficult, and also without a structure, without a teacher, without the lessons. I'm a very structured person, and I like to do the things properly, precise. I'm a bit of a control freak. That was also a reason why the 3 Minuti Grezzi is such a challenge for me, because I'm really a control freak. I want to have everything.
Yeah,
I must know everything, how it works and why, and control.
I mean, being perfect when it comes to learning a language, this can destroy you, right? Because it's difficult to not making any mistakes.
That's something that I always tell when people ask me, give me, suggestion how to learn English, because here in Italy, you might know people are crazy. They all want to learn English. And I say, okay, one advice, get rid of your grammar. What do you mean? Forget your grammar. Because if you are born in Italy, went through the school system in Italy, you started doing English basically in even before primary school, childcare, they already start learning. And in Italy, people, they learn so much grammar that they are paralyzed. They are unable to speak. I met so many Italians in Australia, people with degrees in English, and then we might go to a coffee shop. Oh, Christina, you do it. And I always say, look, what is the worst case that can happen? they don't understand you. They ask you to repeat it. And, a language is there to communicate. People don't care about grammar. In Australia, grammar is not a subject at school. You study grammar if you want to become a philologist or if you want to teach. You don't learn grammar because grammar is something that holds you back. Is a shorthand if you know what a noun is, if you know what an adjective is. It's easier because all adjectives behave like that, but that's it. You shouldn't be, trying to remember. And people here are really paralyzed, and that's why lots of Italians, they don't speak English because they are scared. But that's the school system. It's not just in English. With languages, it's more obvious, but with everything, the school system in Italy makes you scared of. They don't see mistakes as learning steps, mistake as something horrible. I think it's got to do with a Catholic upbringing. Maybe. What do you think?
It was the same in my case in Switzerland, and I grew up in a district where they are very Catholic. We learned a lot of grammar rules, and I had very good grades, but finally I was not able to speak fluently. So this was quite depressing to me.
Look, when I moved to Australia, I had already studied English in high school. I did university. English was my second language, and I arrived in Melbourne, and I lived in a shared house with other people, and I was the only person who spoke Italian. And I was, as I said, very, very, very good at school. I graduated, with very high marks, summa cum laude, everything. So I was really good. I could read everything. And it took me 8 months to understand and to communicate with people because I could not understand a word of what people. Was very, very difficult for me day-to-day shopping because I could produce, very elaborate sentences, but in the moment that they replied to me, I was, excuse me, can you repeat, please? It was really frustrating. But funny enough, the frustration is the strongest motivation. To be in a circle of friends and you have something you think so clever to say and you really muster the courage to say something, but by the time you say it, the conversation has already moved and you feel like a fool. You never, it happened to me so much that you are there and you want to say something, but you cannot say because by the time you have the sentence formed perfectly in your mind, people have already moved on because that's how naturally conversation works. That people just, go from here to there, and it's. But the frustration is the only motivation that really, I have to do better.
And what do you think, Christina? Do we have way more opportunities these days? For example, there are many podcasts out there where we can learn. For example, English is the perfect example because there are so many resources out there. And 10 years ago, there was almost no podcast in Italian or in French. And it's just so great. And sometimes I think I wish I had that when I was a child, right? Because back then I had maybe one cassette. and I had to play it 100 times. And these days you can just search for anything you like about any topic. And sometimes Daniel, it's like overwhelming also because sometimes I think there are too many resources and we can't
fear of
focus.
Missing out. Yes. Look, Daniel, you're absolutely right because podcast is amazing. And in fact, now that I live in Italy, I can keep my English language and my German language. I, listen to lots of podcasts in those languages and also television. Think Netflix, watching everything with subtitles. And because I cannot watch something that is been dubbed and my husband is not as fluent in English. So we watch everything with subtitles and it's perfect. And kids are so lucky. From this point of view, from other point of view, kids are not lucky because when I was a child. I finished school. I arrived home, closed the door of my room, and I, was free. Today, you have to perform 24/7 because you are on social. You have all the extra activities, and people expect from you so much more. So that's really not so nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe let's talk about an app that you also mentioned in one of your episodes. I think it's called Anyone, I think. I can't remember correctly.
Yes, Anyone, yes. I haven't used it for a while now. Thank you for reminding me. I'm such a gullible person. Every time that something new comes, I have to buy it. I have to try it. I'm an early adopter of everything. And yes, it's this amazing app that you download and then you give your availability. And when you are available, anyone can contact you and you talk with this person on the phone. You don't see the person, you can only hear the voice. And I think it's 5 minutes, exactly 5 minutes. And you don't know anything about this person. And it's like, Russian roulette. Beautiful. And I had so beautiful conversations with people. Most of the people, probably because it was early days when I started using it, I should try again. Most of the people that I talked to were people who were working in tech, lots of women as well, which was good. And yeah, it's nice. Someone on the other side of the world. And what's your name? What do you do? What do you think of this? And it's fantastic. I love talking to strangers. And this was like, an app thought just, with me in mind, because it's beautiful.
And I think there's also the possibility to choose between different topics and even specific questions that you then can focus on during the call, which is really great, because sometimes when I tried to have like an exchange in the language learning, how do you call it?
Setting,
exactly. Then sometimes it's difficult to get it started because you don't know what to talk about, or maybe it's just boring, or it doesn't match. And with this app, you can also say, I like this, I like that, I want to talk about that. And as you said, it's just 5 minutes. And well, it's not a language learning app. We have to say that. And I have to admit that I didn't get the courage so far to try it because
you haven't tried yet?
I am not like you, because I am very, very introverted. I am very shy, and to me, it's horror to talk with strangers, right? And so these days, not anymore, because I am enjoying the time with you, for example, right now. But I remember when I started out with my Fluent podcast, I was so scary and I was literally trembling because I was not used to it, but it helped me to become fluent. And now even in my mother tongue, or where I live, it's becoming easier, to talk with strangers.
Yeah, so you really put yourself through lots of, hard time. You gave yourself a hard time, Daniel. Why did you choose this path? You wanted to push yourself? You wanted to conquer?
because I always loved languages, but I learned it in a very passive way, by reading books and so on. And I was not able to speak, and that's why I decided to just to push myself. And then I was like forced to do it. And in the beginning, I scripted everything, every line. And then I took baby steps, little by little. It grew, and then all of a sudden, I was able to interview people. And I was a podcast lover. I still am. I listened to a lot of podcasts, and then I invited my go-to podcasts and my favorite podcasters. So in a way, I had my idols with me there as my English teacher. So
that's clever. Such a clever way to learn a language, and obviously it works on many levels because you conquer your fear of talking to strangers.
Yeah.
You learn obviously the language very well. You practice podcasting, and you got to speak with the people that you like. Perfect.
Yes, exactly.
Next step, Italian now.
Yes, that's right. And I have an interview with a teacher who wrote a book, but yeah, I still have to fix the date for the interview, but I am a little bit scared, but I need more practice. I need more listening to your podcast in Italian, and then this will help me.
Have you noticed, Daniel, that I do a localized translation? I don't translate it literally. I always try to adapt it because I know that the people who don't live in Italy or in Cagliari sometimes who don't know what is this thing. So I adapt so that people understand. So it's not a perfect literal translation. I hope that it works.
Yeah, it works perfectly. So how do you go about it? Do you translate on your own?
I use several apps. I use an app for a to do the transcript. And then I usually throw the transcript in Italian into an app like Google Translate, also other apps as well. And then I, go through it while I'm listening to make sure that and changing whatever needs to be changed. And then I have an app to create the text in form of subtitles, so that when I then put together the Italian voice with the English text, they are synchronized and they fit exactly. And you can literally listen to the Italian words, and at the same time you see the English translation there synchronized.
C'è qualcosa di incredibilmente buffo, ma anche tenero, a guardare i pinguini che si muovono, soprattutto i pinguini imperiali, con il loro bel pancione che avanzano dinoccolati in queste distese di ghiaccio. Forse è proprio per questa caratteristica che Willy Puchner ha scelto proprio i pinguini per il suo libro Die Sehnsucht der Pinguine, la nostalgia dei pinguini, un libro a cui sono molto legata e che mi porto dietro da molti anni. Il libro è un libro illustrato, è di un autore tedesco.
So yeah, I use 2-3 different programs, but as I said, now I've streamlined it in a way that really everything, at the beginning took me 2 hours, now about 1 hour. I'm aware of the fact that when you do a podcast, I don't know how you do, Daniel, but they say that you should use 30% production and 70% promotion. I'm very bad at promoting. I have, I publish 3 Minuti Grezzi on Spreaker, and then automatically goes on YouTube and on Twitter, and I don't do any advertisement. I don't have time, literally, because
it's a pity.
I also have a life.
Because it's really great. Yeah, I think a lot of times, it has to do with the promoting. You have to promote, and otherwise it gets lost because there are so many resources out there. Yeah, and we didn't talk about your real project because you yourself, you said it's just an experiment. So where do you see this experiment? Will you continue? And what about the other projects?
Yes. I started again in January, so I think I'll go until the end of the year, and so I finished in December. What I usually do is I create podcasts, but I don't know how to call them, audio production. I just finished a big work with the Italian university where they gave me, it was an amazing project. They gave me 10 scientific papers, and I mean scientific, really hard stuff about subjects that I didn't know anything about. There was one about the kind of material that I use to fix stone that are old and what kind of chemical things, really complicated formula about subject that I didn't know anything about. And from each of these 10 scientific papers, I create a 2 minutes fictional story. And these were presented in a day that they had to promote scientific research, to encourage people, to make them curious, basically. And this was so much fun because not only I came up with 10 fictional stories, but I also made every story different in the way it was told. So, for example, they are very lyrical. Some other are like stand-up comedian, and really all very, 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 very different. And this is the work that I usually do that takes me forever. First of all, just envisioning, thinking, going through the material. Sometimes I have to go through 20, 30 pages of research about subject that I didn't know anything about, that I didn't care, just to grab words that, inspire me. For example, this one that I told you about, there was a paper about the walls, how to repair walls, blah, blah, blah. The story that I told, that I imagine, is this man that had this power that when he went with his fingers touching the walls, he could tell the stories about the people who lived there. And this man, he was blind. Some people say that he was blind because he touched too much of dangerous stuff and the fumes made him blind. Other people said that he was blind because he got too close to the ferries. And this man went from home to home, and everybody loved having him around because with his fingers, everyone loved listening to their own stories told with the words of this man that touched the wall. So this is an example of
and just
stuff.
in 2
and then,
minutes,
with all the sound design. Yes, absolutely 2 minutes. And another work that I did last year was for the Goethe Institute in Milan. They took care of the German pavilion at the Triennale Milano. And I created podcast and vox pop and teasers to promote the pavilion. And there went lots of work as well, because you have to think, what can I do, something that can speak to people who already know the Triennale, who don't know what it is about, people who know the Goethe Institute, and really cater for all these kind of needs. And yes, I'm really lucky, because usually people contact me and they come across something that I have done and say, would you like to work for us? And I say, yes, I would like to work for you.
Pretty cool. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, podcasting is so brilliant and so beautiful, and it brings a lot of different positive elements. Yeah, at least in my case, yeah, because I also get in touch with people, or I become friends with people from all around the world, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, you're right, Daniel. Podcasting is such a great community. I don't know whether it's because it's a young community compared to many others, but I have met so many beautiful, amazing, generous people, sometimes just through a tweet or a comment that I left. And then, as you said, we took it from there. We became friends. We visited each other. And then this small community, I often, when I can, I go around when there are festival, podcasting festival and so, and we see each other a couple of times a year. And it's beautiful, and it's really very warm, and I don't see this jealousy that I see in so many other aspects of professional life. And everyone is so generous, sharing knowledge, time, advice. This has been my experience, really. An amazing, beautiful community. And at every level, if a person who just took the mic, or people who have been doing it forever, and that, as you said, I consider, my role models, and I love them. And they reply to my messages, and we talk to each other and say, oh my God, so beautiful. I love, there's nothing else that I would like doing in my life than what I do now.
Yeah, absolutely. This would be a dream come true if I could make a living out of it, right? Because in my case, what I do for a living has nothing to do whether about language learning or podcasting. So it's really boring stuff at the office. So yeah.
And you don't manage to, mind you, I do also other stuff for a living because I have, say, 2-3 big projects a year, but then in between, schools are calling me to teach podcast and communication.
Oh, cool.
And that's, it's lovely to teach podcasting to young kids. I do lots of listening, and I always say, look, I won't teach you, what is the best mic or stuff like that, because it's important to an extent, and this stuff you can pick, anywhere, tutorials on YouTube. What I'll teach you is how to listen, and I'll teach you how to pick the different things that you have to be aware of to see whether it's a good podcast, what works for you, and also to basically active listening and to take care, to be attentive to the different layers, especially when a podcast is built on different layers that you listen to different, several times and so. And they love it. And of course, they also love when I throw them on the street, go and do interviews, and I, teach them the tricks of the trade. Because as I said, I work as a journalist for many years, so there are, the tricks of the trade. As I said, always interview the person, flamboyant, wearing a hat, or with very bright colors, because those are the people who like talking, and don't go to the person who has already the headphones listening to something, and keep the mic in a way, not in their face. Must be a extension of your arm, so they will forget that it's there, and tricks of the trade.
So are you also a coach, like a personal coach? Do you teach?
What do you mean personal? As I said, I teach communication, and but I do like workshops and master classes of communications and podcasting. And again, I didn't really think myself about teaching this stuff, but when I came back to Sardinia, to Italy 7 years ago, I realized that my knowledge and my expertise is quite specific, because I started doing podcasts and broadcasting 20 years ago, and in English, in an English-speaking country like Australia, that is very much in line with the States and UK, and they are 15 years ahead compared to Italy in terms of podcasting and how many people listen to. But the sheer numbers, if you do anything in English, you have a world audience. Whatever I do in Italian, there are 60 million people living in Italy. If these 2 million of people listen to podcasts in Italy, of these people, probably 3 like my podcast. I don't know.
And can you tell us where can we find your podcasts?
You find all the links on my website, Cristina Marras, RRSNDN.com. And there you find all the links to 3 raw minutes, 3 Minuti Grezzi, raw because they are unedited and unprepared. And then I am on all the socials. On Instagram, I am address approx, and then Cristina Marras on Twitter. I'm quite easy to find. If you type Cristina Marras, I'm a bit everywhere, because I produce, just the sheer number of a podcast a day with 3 Minuti Grezzi, it's like, all over the place. Yes.
Yeah, and I will, of course, also put the links in the show notes. And actually, I I am trying to do also like my own version of 3 Minuti Grezzi in Italian, but I haven't published yet. I just record myself about a topic, and that is like my method, right? So right now I have the first method is listening to Italian to your podcast, and the second one is recording myself and then trying to figure out how I could say it in a better way. But I haven't published because I have a lot of right?
Look, I give you just as you were talking, I had a thought. What you could do, because as I said, I publish in the notes of every episode the transcript in Italian and in English. You can listen and see, what you understand. Otherwise, you go and pick, what does it mean, and so on. And then every day you could reply to my 3 Minuti Grezzi in Italian, because a big burden is to think, okay, what do I talk about? But if you already have something to talk about, you are replying to whatever I was talking about, and you have also a bit of vocabulary, because just going through the transcript, you have the main terms, what I've been talking about, and so you could challenge yourself. Not to publish, of course, but just to challenge yourself to see how you go talking about an answer, reply, or a comment on my 3 raw minutes. So you wouldn't have to be there. Oh, what do I talk about? Because I give you the topics.
That is an excellent idea, and maybe I should publish, because this gives you the extra boost. Because when I started out with my Fluent podcast, this was also like a motivation boost to know that maybe someone else in the world is listening to you, and then you give a 100%.
That's you're right. Look, I know that I have, as I said, I don't do much of marketing. I have about 10 very, very, very faithful listeners / friends. And then sometimes out of the blue, I have 50, 60 people that listen to me in one day, and I don't know who they are. I realize that sometimes when you are listening from the app, then they roll up one after the other. And in fact, I had this idea to search for a place like a bar, a cafe, a restaurant, and to have 3 by 24 3 Minuti Grezzi 24 hours, because I have now over 24 hours of recording in all the, if you take all the, imagine people can come and go and have a drink, listen and chat, and for 24 hours, a marathon of 3 Minuti Grezzi by Cristina Marras. That would be so much fun, because you don't have to listen all the time, but just a back noise, and then you talk with the people and you meet other people who maybe didn't know about 3 Minuti Grezzi. I'd love to do it.
Or you could do like an Italian course, right? Because it's like the base, and then there is like a vocabulary list, and then the students have to also give an answer. They have to record themselves, and this would be amazing. I'm thinking more in terms of live not live, but performance. I'm not teaching. It's just too much work teaching, really. Language, because I know that it's as a teacher is really, you have to practice a lot, but why not? We could even do something together. I could even come and do something in your cantone, where you live. And I wanted to ask you, maybe would it be possible in the future, but not now, but maybe in 3 months or so, that we could do a second interview in Italian?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm here. I'm really very, very, very happy to, be part of this. And I love, and my voice is different when I speak in Italian, and you as well. When you speak other languages than English, you might have realized that when you listen to you again, my voice is completely different when I speak in Italian.
And it made me laugh. In one of your episodes, you said that when you are angry, you switched to English, right?
Yes, I didn't realize. My son said, "Mama, when you're angry with me, you speak in English." It's true. I don't know why. I don't know. Something that weird. But yeah, you're right. Because language is linked to so many things. As you were saying before, that it takes such a long time to learn the language. But sometimes more than the language is the culture, is what the language represents. I've worked many years as a translator, and sometimes the easiest terms, the most common terms, are the most difficult to translate into another language that has a different culture, where they don't have that institution, they don't have that way of doing things. Think about, in Italian, fare brutta figura is when you do something that is shameful, but it's not shameful in a way that you shame yourself, you shame your community, you shame your family. It's not something religious. It's really something so intrinsically Italian, this concept of bella figura, brutta figura.
It only exists in Italia, in Italy.
Yes. So you have really, of course, you can explain in another language, but you have to really write a paragraph explaining what it is and what is not. Yes.
I almost forgot, because I wanted to ask you if you have a favorite expression or a favorite word or a favorite saying. It could be in English or in Italian.
Yes, it is in Sardinian, is ayo, written A-Y-O. And ayo in Sardinian means come on, let's go, but also many other things. And I've chosen this word because sometimes something very annoying happens, that people from Italy, they come here on holiday in Sardinia, because Sardinia is really an amazing place. Really, I've traveled all over the world, and I can tell you, I've been spoiled, because I might be on in the Fiji island, or in Thailand, or some beautiful places in Australia, and there are really beautiful places. But if you were born in Sardinia, yeah, I've been there, done that. and so lots of people come to Sardinia on holiday, and Italian, also French, and then they start saying ayo, 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 and people in Sardinia resent it a bit, because it feels like, you are, today you would say appropriating, and but it's one of my favorite words, because it means so many different things depending on the way that you pronounce it, the gesture that you do, the context, and it's really easy on your tongue. Sounds almost Arabic, ayo, 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 and easy to learn, and I love it. It's passepartout.
Passepartout, yeah, it's great. Very cool. Thank you so much. It was really great chatting with you, and I hope that I get the courage to really ask you again for the interview in Italian.
Look, Daniel, I'm a very precise person, and as soon as we finish this conversation, I will set in my calendar. We are, May, June, July, August, September. If you don't do it before, I will contact you and I ask you for an interview. I'll ask you, give me my interview in Italian. Daniel,
awesome.
Intervistami in italiano, dai, dobbiamo parlare in italiano la prossima volta.
Sì, chiaro. Dobbiamo
Perfetto.
parlare la prossima. Grazie.
Grazie a te.